18 months ago, I had $340 in my checking account, 3 days before payday, and I genuinely believed I would never save real money on my salary. Not because I didn't want to, because I'd tried before, more than once, and it never stuck. I'd save $200, something would come up, and I'd be back to zero within 6 weeks. I assumed that was just what my income allowed. And honestly, I'd started to believe there was something wrong with me specifically, not with the plan. I was wrong, but not in the way most people expect. I didn't get a raise. I didn't pick up a side hustle. I didn't move back in with my parents or cut out everything I enjoyed. I was making $65,000 a year the entire time, the exact same salary I'd had when I had $340 to my name. 18 months later, I had $10,000 sitting in an account I hadn't touched. Here's what's strange about that number. It's not $10,000 because I found some secret income stream. It's $10,000 because of one specific thing that happened a few months in that changed how the entire rest of the 18 months played out. And it wasn't a budgeting app, and it wasn't a spreadsheet, and it definitely wasn't cutting out coffee. I want to walk you through this the way it actually happened, mistakes included, because I think that just save more advice fails most people for the same reason it failed me the first 3 times I tried. It doesn't fail because people lack discipline. It fails because it skips the actual mechanics of what changes when saving finally works. The first time I tried to save seriously, I did exactly what every finance article tells you to do. I opened a savings account, calculated 20% of my take-home pay, and set a goal to move that amount every month. On $65,000, my take-home after taxes was roughly $4,150 a month. 20% of that is $830. I moved $830 into savings the first payday of the plan and felt like I'd finally figured out adult life. I remember genuinely feeling proud of myself that day. By day 19 of that month, I'd transferred $300 of it back into checking to cover rent, because I hadn't actually accounted for the fact that my paycheck landed on the 15th and my rent was due on the 1st, which meant I was always floating on the previous month's income to cover the current month's bills. I didn't understand this timing gap existed until I was already in it, panicking slightly, moving money back the way I'd promised myself I wouldn't. That left me with $530 actually saved from month 1. The second month, I tried again, moved $830 again, and within 2 weeks, I transferred back $450 because my car insurance renewed and I hadn't budgeted for it separately, leaving $380 saved from that month. After 2 months of this, I had $910 sitting in savings, not the $1,660 I'd expected, and I felt like I'd failed at the exact same thing I'd failed at before. Worse, honestly, because this time I'd had a real plan and it still hadn't held. Here's what I didn't understand yet, and it's the entire reason those first 2 months went the way they did. I was trying to save a percentage of an income I didn't actually understand the shape of. I knew the total number. I had no idea when money left and when it arrived relative to when bills were due. So instead of trying again with the same 20% number, I spent the next month doing something that felt almost embarrassingly basic, the kind of thing I'd avoided because it felt tedious rather than because it felt hard. I wrote down the exact date every single recurring expense left my account and the exact date my paycheck arrived. Rent on the 1st, paycheck on the 15th and the 30th, car insurance on the 8th, phone bill on the 22nd, streaming subscriptions scattered across 4 different dates because I'd signed up for each one at a different point in the year. What this revealed was that I had roughly 12 days every month, between the 1st and the 12th, where I was almost always tight because rent had just gone out and my next paycheck hadn't landed yet. Every previous attempt to save had collapsed during exactly this window because I was trying to save the same fixed amount regardless of where I was in that cycle. I wasn't bad at saving. I was scheduling my savings transfers on days when I didn't actually have the money to spare. It was a strange kind of relief to realize that, because it meant I hadn't been failing at discipline. I'd been failing at timing. This one realization is, in hindsight, the actual turning point of the entire 18 months, more than any specific dollar amount. Once I could see the shape of my own cash flow on paper, I stopped guessing. That mapping month didn't add anything to savings, but it's the reason every month after it actually worked. Here's what I changed after that. Instead of one number moved once a month, I split my savings transfer to match my paycheck schedule, not an arbitrary calendar date. $300 out of the 15th paycheck, the same day it landed, before it ever sat in my checking account long enough to feel spendable. $300 out of the 30th paycheck, same rule. That's $600 a month, lower than the $830 I'd tried before, and smaller than what I actually wanted to be saving, if I'm honest. But the difference is it actually happened, every single time, without needing me to feel disciplined about it. The math on that, $600 a month for 3 months is $1,800. Over the next 3 months, I had $2,710 sitting untouched. That $1,800 plus the $910 left over from my earlier attempts. 3 months in a row without a single emergency transfer back into checking. I remember checking the balance around the 3rd month almost suspiciously, waiting for something to go wrong the way it always had before. Nothing did. That consistency mattered more than the dollar amount because it was the first time in years I'd gone that long without the savings account bleeding back into checking. Around that same time, my rent went up $40. It wasn't dramatic, but it was the first real test of whether the system could absorb a change without me having to intervene. And it did. I didn't adjust my transfer, and something smaller elsewhere quietly gave instead, without me needing to manage it consciously. Once that new system had been running steadily for a while, I did something I'd avoided for years because I assumed I already knew where my money went. I printed out 3 months of bank and credit card statements and went through every single line, out loud, categorizing each one. It felt tedious and a little uncomfortable, honestly, the way looking closely at anything you've been avoiding tends to feel. I found $34 a month in 2 subscriptions I'd completely forgotten existed. One for a meditation app I'd used 4 times 2 years earlier. One for cloud storage I didn't need because I'd since switched services. I found that I was spending an average of $186 a month on food delivery, which I'd mentally filed as occasional, but was actually happening 2 to 3 times a week. I found that my grocery bill had crept up nearly $60 a month over the previous year without me consciously deciding to buy anything different. Just slightly pricier versions of the same items, one substitution at a time. None of these were dramatic discoveries. None of them felt like catching myself doing anything wrong. That's what made them so easy to miss for years, and honestly, a little humbling to finally see written down in front of me. I canceled the 2 subscriptions immediately, $34 a month back. I didn't eliminate delivery, but I capped it at once a week, which took it from $186 down to around $70 a month, another $116 back. I didn't overhaul my grocery shopping. I just started comparing unit prices again for a few weeks until better habits reformed on their own, which brought that bill down by roughly $40 a month. Total found money, $190 a month, discovered in a single afternoon of going through statements I'd been avoiding looking at closely for years. I didn't earn a single extra dollar. I just stopped losing $190 a month to defaults nobody had actively chosen. With that $190 a month freed up, I did the same thing again. I raised my automatic transfer without waiting to feel ready. $600 a month became $750 a month, split across both paychecks the same way. That's a $150 increase, not the full $190. I left the remaining $40 sitting in checking on purpose as a little breathing room, since the whole point of this system was that it had to survive contact with real life, not just look good on paper. 4 months at $750 is $3,000 on top of the $2,710 I already had. By the end of that stretch, I was sitting at $5,710. Something happened during this period that I hadn't expected. Once the transfer was automatic and the leftover amount in checking was smaller than I was used to, I stopped making small discretionary purchases almost entirely on my own without trying to. Not because I was white-knuckling through willpower, but because there simply wasn't a comfortable cushion sitting in checking inviting me to spend it. The account I actually looked at day to day had less room in it, so the decisions that used to happen on autopilot, an extra takeout order, a slightly nicer bottle of wine, stopped happening on autopilot too. I hadn't budgeted for this effect. It just happened, as a side effect of moving the money out of sight before I could reconsider it. Then came the real test. My car needed a repair. $1,200 all at once, the exact kind of expense that had wiped out every previous savings attempt I'd ever made. I remember the specific feeling of dread when the mechanic called with the number, that old instinct kicking in, the one that expected this to undo everything. This was the moment that would tell me whether any of the previous months had built something real, or whether I was about to watch it evaporate the way it always had before. I paid it directly from savings. My balance dropped from $5,710 down to $4,510. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was almost nothing. No panic, no scrambling, no credit card. Just a lower number in an account and a car that worked again. That single moment, more than any of the math before or after it, is what actually convinced me this attempt was different from the previous ones. Every prior version of me had treated an unexpected expense as a crisis that derailed the entire plan. This time, it was just a Tuesday. I want to be honest about what came next because it's the part that gets skipped in almost every version of this story I've seen, and it's the part that actually made the difference. The following 4 months were boring, genuinely uneventful. No dramatic discovery, no new system, no test of an emergency. Just $750 a month, automatically, landing the same 2 days every month, while my balance climbed from $4,510 back up to $7,510. There's a temptation, once you've built something, to start second-guessing whether you're doing enough or to chase some new optimization. I felt that temptation more than once during this stretch, a nagging sense that I should be doing something more sophisticated with the money. I didn't change anything. I didn't increase the amount further, even though I probably could have. I let those months be uneventful on purpose, because the entire previous attempts at saving had failed specifically during the moments when I tried to change something midstream. Consistency during a boring stretch isn't glamorous, but $750 times 4 is $3,000, and that $3,000 showed up exactly the same whether I was excited about it that month or not. The final 4 months followed the same pattern. $750 a month, automatically, no changes. 4 more months at $750 is another $3,000, bringing the total from $7,510 up to $10,510. 18 months after I started with $340 to my name and a pattern of failing at this exact goal repeatedly for years before that, I'd crossed $10,000. I sat with that number for a while the first time I saw it. It didn't feel triumphant exactly. It felt more like quiet relief, the specific kind that comes from finally trusting yourself with something you doubted for years. Here's the full math laid out plainly, because I think it matters more than the story around it. 2 false start months that netted $910. 3 months at $600 automatic transfers, $1,800. 4 months at $750 after finding $190 a month in forgotten spending, $3,000. A $1,200 emergency withdrawal that didn't restart the clock. 4 boring, uneventful months at $750, $3,000. 4 final months at $750 crossing the finish line, $3,000. Total, just over $10,500 on the same $65,000 salary I'd had the entire time. I didn't get a raise during these 18 months. I still went out with friends. I still ordered delivery, just less often. I didn't sell a kidney, learn to code, or start a business on the side. The entire difference between the version of me with $340 and the version of me with $10,000 came down to a handful of specific, boring, mechanical changes. Understanding the actual timing of my cash flow instead of guessing at it, automating transfers the same day money arrived instead of hoping I'd remember to do it later, going through my actual spending once instead of assuming I already knew it, and then doing absolutely nothing dramatic for months at a time when there was nothing left to fix. The part that surprised me most, looking back, is that the hardest month of the entire 18 wasn't the month my car broke down. It was one of the boring ones, the stretch where nothing happened and it would have been easy to convince myself the plan wasn't exciting enough to keep following. Every previous time I'd failed at saving, it wasn't during a crisis. It was during a stretch exactly like that one, where I got bored of the plan and changed something before it had the chance to just keep working. So let's talk about how you'd actually apply this, because I don't think automate your savings as a piece of advice is useful without the specific sequence that made it work. Start this week by writing down the exact date every recurring bill leaves your account and the exact date your paycheck lands. Not a budget, just a calendar. This is the step that took me 3 failed attempts to figure out, and it's the reason every version before it collapsed. This month, set up an automatic transfer timed to your paycheck date, not an arbitrary day of the month, at an amount low enough that it will actually survive contact with your bills. Lower and consistent beats higher and abandoned by week 3 every time. Over the next few months, go through 3 months of actual statements, line by line, looking specifically for subscriptions and small recurring charges that used to be conscious decisions and have since become invisible defaults. This is usually where the first real increase in your savings rate comes from, with 0 change to your income. And going forward, when an emergency happens, because it will, let the money you've saved absorb it without treating the withdrawal as a failure of the entire plan. The plan isn't broken because you used it for what it was for. The version of me that survived a $1,200 repair without panicking is the same version of me that made it to $10,000 6 months later. I had $340 and a history of failing at this exact goal. 18 months later, on the same salary, I had over $10,000, and the difference wasn't willpower. It was a handful of boring mechanical decisions, made once, that kept working long after I stopped thinking about them every day. That's the whole story. It's not more complicated than that, and I think that's exactly why it worked.